Why the White House staff kept someone around who had been accused of domestic abuse by two ex-wives and an ex-girlfriend. Questions that the White House continues to refuse to answer. And of what we do know, it seems the White House explanation is not really holding up. The White House would lead you to believe they've been nothing but clear and consistent on this issue. In fact, Chief of Staff John Kelly just told the Wall Street Journal about the Porter situation, quote, "It was all done right." That's just wrong. Just since yesterday, we've learned more that suggests the White House has not told the American people the full truth. From the White House podium yesterday, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders painted a rosy picture of a White House motivated by a clear sense of right and wrong, seeking to remove, with clarity and purpose, someone who had been accused of abhorrent behavior.
We learned of the extent of the situation involving Rob Porter last Tuesday evening, and within 24 hours, his resignation had been accepted and announced. We announced a transition was going to happen, and within hours, it did.
What that narrative does not acknowledge is that the initial response from the White House was to prop up Porter and stand by Porter. Before he had resigned, they were issuing glowing statements. Sanders praising Porter as, quote, someone of the highest integrity and exemplary character. Chief of Staff John Kelly saying, quote, Rob Porter is a man of true integrity and honor, and I cannot say enough good things about him. And this morning, CNN learned that the rally around Porter went even further, that shortly after noon that day, last Wednesday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called to her office 4 top print reporters who had questions about Porter. They came to her office, and there was Rob Porter. He spoke with them off the record, sharing his side of the stories involving his 2 ex-wives and their very disturbing charges. Keep in mind, this was after the Daily Mail published 2 reports detailing the accusations and after that black eye photograph of Porter's first ex-wife was published by The Intercept. One source says the White House saw this off-the-record discussion, first reported by Politico, as an opportunity for Porter to tell his side of the story. But whatever the motivations, make no mistake, this was the communication staff of the White House facilitating an opportunity for an accused domestic abuser to tell journalists from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Axios that his ex-wives were liars. All of it paid for by your tax dollars, and a clear contradiction to the narrative that the White House is now pushing, that once they saw the black eye photo, Porter was essentially shown the door. An even more stark contradiction came today as well from President Trump's hand-picked FBI director testifying on Capitol Hill. The White House has been insisting that the background check into Porter by the FBI had still been ongoing, which was why that the White House had allowed Porter to remain on staff with access to classified information. This was something that Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah said last week.
His background investigation was ongoing. That process hadn't been completed, so we were relying on the information that we had.
It's something that Sarah Sanders repeated yesterday.
As I know Raj addressed last week, we let the process play out. It was ongoing.
But today, FBI Director Christopher Wray said the White House had repeatedly been briefed on Porter's background investigation beginning in March of last year, and that the investigation had been closed 6 months ago, back in July 2017.
The FBI submitted a partial report on the investigation in question in March, and then a completed background investigation in late July. That is, soon thereafter, we received requests for follow-up inquiry, and we did the follow-up and provided that information in November, and then we administratively closed the file in January. And then earlier this month, we received some additional information, and we passed that on as well.
Now, faced with this obvious contradiction, Sarah Sanders, just a few minutes ago, acknowledged that the FBI had finished its process, but she said the process had not been completed internally at the White House.
The White House Personnel Security Office, which is staffed by career officials, may have received information, but they had not completed their process.
Okay, everyone got that? So today, the process that was not completed was the one that was internal at the White House Personnel Office. That, of course, is the exact opposite of what Sanders said just 24 hours ago. Take a listen.
Look, this is a process that isn't doesn't operate within the White House. It's handled by our law enforcement and intelligence community.
The White House has yet to be forthright and transparent with the American people about how this happened. The most clarity that we have gotten so far might be from President Trump himself, who has wished Porter well in his future, but has not said or written one single word of support for the victims of his alleged abuse or for survivors of domestic violence in general. Instead, we've been misled and we've been lied to time and again. And for what? To cover up for the guy who allegedly did this? Let's go now to CNN's Jeff Zeleny. He's at the White House. And Jeff, you were in the briefing. How is the White House explaining what appear to be clear inconsistencies in the timeline revealed today?
Well, Jake, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders tried to explain it in one word. When she was asked simply who is telling the truth here, who's giving the version of the events, the FBI or the White House, she said both are. And that's where the contradiction lies. Today's version of the White House press briefing had the press secretary essentially trying to say that it was this Office of White House Personnel Security that was essentially to blame for this, that they were still working on this. She did say for the first time, trying to clear up some of these discrepancies, that yes, the FBI's portion of the investigation was closed, but then they required more field work. Jake, what I am being told, that is to essentially refute what Rob Porter was saying, or going back to look into more information about what he was saying there. But what Sarah Sanders did not say today was who in the West Wing actually got that information from that office. Was it White House Chief of Staff John Kelly? Was it Don McGahn, the White House counsel's office? Jake, one thing I saw today, Sarah Sanders said no fewer than 4 times, to the best of my knowledge, under the information that I have been given. She was reading from a statement right in front of her. So that, to me, was very telling here. Again, on day 8, this is still not answered, Jake.
Jeff Zeleny, thank you so much. I'm joined now by my political panel. We have with us Joan Walsh, the national affairs correspondent for The Nation, Tara Setmeyer, former communications director for Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, and Joshua Green, whose new book, Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Nationalist Uprising, is out today in paperback. Thanks, one and all, for being here. Joan, let me start with you. I don't even know where to begin, really, but one day she's saying that the problem is the process, the investigation outside the White House, the FBI. Then the FBI director says, no, that's not true. And she says, oh, the problem is internal, not the problem, but the process was ongoing inside. I mean, there's no, they don't even feel the need to be consistent one day to the next.
There's going to be a third answer tomorrow, Jake. I think we can count on that. I think we learned a couple things today. I think we learned that this White House doesn't care about the truth, so no one is really trying very hard to get to the bottom. I think this White House doesn't care about domestic violence, and that's why they've been so cavalier. And I think there's a way in which the president has intentionally brought this on himself by reopening. Seem to make him the opposition to the Me Too movement, make him part of the backlash to Me Too. I think he wants this. I think we know he likes these culture war issues, and so I think he's come out, he doesn't care. He's shrugging off these allegations and casting his concern and his lot with the men who are accused, and he's one of them, actually.
So, Tara, the Politico broke the story, and CNN has confirmed it and added some more, which is that Wednesday, after the story broke, the black eye was still out there. Sarah Sanders and the communications staff brought in these 4 reporters with the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Axios. They went in there. Rob Porter's there. He gives off the record his basic version of events. How can this be interpreted as anything other than the White House facilitating an opportunity for an alleged domestic abuser to call his ex-wives liars?
That is exactly what happened, and they got caught. And the fact that you see them going back and forth, that we're almost a week plus into this, and we still don't have the story straight, is pretty remarkable. It just proves that they were covering for Rob Porter the entire time. No one believes this idea that they're so upset about this, and that the president, Kellyanne Conway, trying to convince us all that the president was so upset about this, and he cares about domestic violence and abuse. BS, because if they did, Rob Porter would have been gone months ago. This isn't that they were continuing. It's clear now that they were looking for reasons to keep him. How do we keep him, despite what they already knew? They think, well, maybe they're not telling the truth. And the president, well, he likes him. Look, he could have been our next Supreme Court justice, making jest about what a wonderful resume this guy has. And yet, when it came down to it, they were willing to keep someone who was effective and who looked good, as opposed to taking the evidence that was in front of them. And this nonsense about due process. Due process is a criminal term. We're not talking about a criminal court of law here. We're talking about discretion and discernment in private or public, in that it's the taxpayer paying this person's job. Discretion in that job, and if they can't make that kind of judgment with someone with this kind of credible evidence, it just goes to show you the level of incompetence in the White House.
So, Josh, Jeff Zeleny pointed this out, which was how many times Sarah Sanders used a particular turn of phrase when giving her answers today. Take a listen.
I only give you the best information that I have, and that's my understanding. We're giving you the best information that we're going to have. Obviously, the press team's not going to be as read in maybe as some other elements at a given moment on a variety of topics, but we relay the best and most accurate information that we have.
I want to ask you whether you've spoken specifically to General John Kelly and to the White House counsel to ask them these questions, because you said, I'm not aware or I'm not sure.
I have, and this is the information that was given to me by those individuals.
I mean, she seems to be trying to say to reporters, trying to say to anyone out there, like, I'm not being told everything.
Yeah, and that's what we're hearing privately from West Wing officials, is that they're not. And I think this is the heart of the problem. I mean, this is why we're entering week 2 of the scandal. This is political malpractice. When you have a scandal like this, the first thing you do internally, you go and figure out the facts, what actually happened. You talk to your staff and get a story straight and say, okay, here's how we're going to approach this. And you come to the press with a clear, consistent, and factual explanation of what happened so these things don't drag on. It seems pretty clear to me that if the White House press secretary doesn't have this information, it's because her boss doesn't want her to have this information. And Trump, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to feel the need to stop this scandal that's roiling his White House. Because if he did, he's the president, and he could get out there and say, you guys get your ducks in a row and go out and let's end this thing today.
And what's the reason for that? Why would they not want to? I mean, if they want this behind them, you have to be transparent.
I don't think that the president particularly cares about getting it behind him. I think it's more important to stand up for the right of this man who has been denied, as Tara says, due process, which is a complete misunderstanding of the term. But, you know, we have, yesterday Sarah Sanders goes at the FBI. They came back at her today. So now you have her diminished in a way, incapable of really having confidence in what she's telling us. She's been called essentially a liar by Christopher Wray today. And so now she's standing by, this is the best information I have. This is what I've been told.
This has happened multiple times.
Sure.
She goes out there and says these things, and the president the president undermines her, or the facts come out and we realize it's not actually true, and it just diminishes the entire operation. But I'll tell you what, if they had a professional communications shop at the White House, this never would have happened. This is what happens when you put people who are incompetent and inexperienced in these kinds of positions. I was a communications director in Congress, and not the White House, but in Congress, and there are just basic steps that you take in crisis management, which didn't happen here. The first being, what actually happened, so what happened during all these stories changing doesn't happen. I mean, that's the first step in crisis communications, get it all out. The truth first.
Everyone stick around. We're going to talk much more. The White House is standing by its statement that Porter's background check was not finished before he had resigned, but that is not what the FBI said. Can both be true? We're going to talk to an FBI expert for this one. Stay with us.